Something you might not know about me is that I am actually a pretty big fan of Twilight. I have read each book about a dozen times and have seen the movies just as much. While obviously it's no marvel of literature, I find it to be a good story with interesting characters. So obviously when I decided I wanted to find some audiobooks to listen to while at work each day, I started with Midnight Sun, the retelling of the first book but from Edward's perspective instead of Bella's. After finishing that one, I decided instead of starting the series at Twilight and going till the end again, I would try to find something else to listen to. Something new, and that's when I discovered the Crave series. Being currently about halfway through the second book in the series, I couldn't help but notice that there are a ton of similarities, but also some huge differences between the two. Since I'm currently battling a loss of passion for wrestling, I feel like doing different videos on other subjects I'm interested in might help re-spark that lost passion. I will be talking about spoilers in this video. Obviously, I can't really talk about story differences without doing so. Also, since I'm only halfway through the second book of the Crave series, I have no idea how different or similar the stories end up becoming later on, so take that into account as well. A quick overview of the main characters for both books so you aren't lost when I use their names. I'll start with Twilight. The main character is Isabella Swan, or Bella for short, her family, Charlie, her father, and Renee, her mother. Then you have Edward Cullen, the love interest and main vampire of the series. Then you have his family, Alice, Rosalie, Carlisle, Esme, Jasper, and Emmett. Then you have Jacob Black, Bella's shapeshifter friend who was interested in her. In Crave, we have Grace Foster, the main character, her family, Macy Foster, the cousin, and Finn Foster, her uncle. Jackson Vega, the main love interest vampire, his brother Hudson Vega, and Flint Montgomery, the shapeshifter friend. Trying not to go into too much detail here on each because I want to go over how they are similar or different throughout the video. At first glance, Crave would seem like a blatant ripoff of Twilight. As Crave came out a full 15 years after Twilight, I can't blame people for seeing it as such, on the surface anyway. Twilight is about a human girl who moves to a different state that sees very limited sunlight and falls in love with a vampire that goes to her high school. While Crave is about a human girl who moves to a different state that sees very limited sunlight and falls in love with a vampire that goes to her high school. So as you can see, a lot of differences there. In all seriousness, the basic premise of both books are very similar, and the similarities don't end there. But there are many differences once you add details to those statements. While both are moving to a different state at the start, the reasons are very different. In Twilight, Bella is going to Forks, Washington to allow her mother to spend more time with her new boyfriend who moves around a lot. A self-sacrificing act to allow someone she loves to have a happier life at the expense of her own happiness. Grace, on the other hand, is moving to Alaska after both of her parents were killed in an accident. Her choice isn't much of a sacrifice compared to Bella's, but her trying to move away because she can't handle being around the same places she spent with her parents adds a different emotional level to her choice. Both locations are similar in that they are sunless a lot of the time and perfect for vampires. But the differences are very drastic. The greatest downside to Forks is that there isn't much to do there and it rains the majority of the year. It causes Bella to be pretty down about everything until her romance really started going. While Grace moves to a place that is pretty much average 30 below at any given time, and she could legit die if she isn't careful about the weather. Many instances in the book shows Grace doing a certain thing or action just because she isn't prepared to weather the immense cold and snow outside for a different route. Bella goes to an incredibly small town, which means she has a very small high school. Her class size is incredibly small, so everyone knows everyone, while Grace's school is a huge Gothic castle. I would talk more about the school as a school, but the entire first book of Crave, I believe, takes place over like 2 weeks, so most of what is talked about and covered in the book is just her drama and love stuff. The biggest differences between the two, though, is the knowledge amongst the characters of the supernatural. In Twilight, the school in town is just a normal school in town. Everyone is human except the Cullens, and later Jacob Black's tribe that I cannot pronounce. No one knows about vampires, so that plays a huge part in the story right from the beginning. In Crave, the Katmere Academy is specifically for the supernatural. It's a school for vampires, werewolves, shifters, and so forth. This detail alone makes the two stories at the basic level incredibly different. Every single important moment in Twilight is painted with the dread of needing to keep the secrecy, while Crave has no limitations, so a lot of the story points you would find in Twilight is nowhere to be seen in Crave. One of the biggest differences between the two is the vast amount of different creatures there are in Crave compared to Twilight. Twilight only has vampires and shape changers who turn into wolves. There is mention of werewolves, but one is never seen in the series. While in Crave, there is everything. Vampires, werewolves, shifters, witches, gargoyles, dragons, and so on. Those are just the things that are directly shown and interacted with in the story, but there is much, much more mentioned offhand, like mermaids, succubuses, water shifters, and so on. Let's compare the vampires since this is the hugest thing in common between the two stories. There are a lot of similarities, such as they are essentially immortal, incredibly durable. They both seem to have additional powers other than the normal strength and speed, and they both drink blood to survive. For every similarity, it's only on the surface though, as once you begin to examine each one more closely, you find differences. While both types of vampires are durable, the Twilight version seemed to be much more durable. In the first book of Crave, Jackson seems to take damage from a falling chandelier, which Edward would have shaken off like it was a light breeze. They both seem to have similar speeds at the very least, where Twilight vampires just run incredibly fast, but the Crave vampires do this thing called fading, where they kind of short distance teleport over and over again. Something that is both similar but vastly different between the two is how they react to sunlight and how they feed. In Twilight, vampires are not harmed by the sunlight, it only affects their appearance. It causes the sun to reflect off of their body in millions of sparkles. While in Crave, the sunlight only hurts the vampires if they have fed on human blood in like the last week or so. It's explained that the way a vampire's body processes the human blood releases an enzyme that causes their skin to become hypersensitive to the sunlight. There is a way around that though. Feeding on animal blood will cause the same reaction, resulting in the sun becoming a non-issue. While in Twilight, on the other hand, when a vampire feeds on animal blood instead of human blood, it causes their eyes to turn from a bright red to an orangish amber color, and that's about it. The vampires in Crave seem to have much more control over their thirst and venom than the Twilight vampires, for example. In Crave, there are many instances of a vampire venom being used to mend a wound, but it's never insinuated that the person could have changed into a vampire from the bite at all. While in Twilight, vampire venom is good for only one thing, and that's turning people into vampires. As you can see, on the surface, this book would seem like just another of the dozens of Twilight ripoffs that have come out since the first book. Obviously, if you actually look into the story past the surface, you can see so many differences that the comparison is kind of ludicrous. One is a story about a girl who moves to a new town and goes on a journey of first love with someone that's love comes with an intense consequence, while the other is about a girl who moves to a border school to try to start her recovery from the trauma of losing her parents, only to find that there is a wicked plot to take her life. She doesn't know who to trust, who is trying to kill her, but the one thing she does know is that she can count on Jackson Vega. So the next time you think something isn't worth your time because it's just an obvious ripoff of a beloved series, maybe give it a try anyway. You might be surprised.